Well, we're going to get a bit more analysis on all of this now with Théo Bourgery-Gonse, a journalist from Euractiv, who joins me now live. Théo, thanks so much for joining us. Just set the stage for our viewers a bit first, if you would. How bad are things for French farmers at the moment?
Well, they're bad and they're getting worse. The movement has been going on for, it's fair to say that it's been brewing for months and years. And just like your reporting was talking about, really the two words that come back are one of dignity and respect for the work that they're doing. Pay, they deem it to be too low. And they basically ask that there's an immediate response on pay from the government, emergency financial help, especially with EU money, so that they can basically sustain their output and their daily work. And then there's a more general frustration, which really stems to the EU's approach to agricultural policy that's been going on for years, as the European Commission has been unrolling a set of pro-environment legislation called the Green Deal. And the farmers say that this Green Deal has regulatory burdens so strong that run completely against the interest of their day-to-day that they just simply cannot cope.
Just stay with France for 1 minute more, if you will. Many of our viewers remember a lot of the unrest we saw with the yellow vest protests here. Do you think that this could turn into something as big as that?
It's a genuine concern, and I think the government is thinking about it very, very clearly. I mean, you say the gilets jaunes and the yellow vest. We get, there's been this word of green vest as well. I mean, ultimately, this is a movement that is growing and really that is getting massive popular support. I think 87% of French people say they sympathize with the movement in a popular support that was nowhere near that of the yellow vest. So is there a risk of something broad-based growing? Absolutely.
How would you say the protests here in France relate to EU-wide movements? Can we find any common denominators between the protests in France and the other protests we've seen popping up across Europe, like in Germany?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. When you think about it, some concerns have been national. When you look at Poland, for example, it's the agri-imports from Ukraine that are bringing prices down. In Germany, it's the sudden freeze in subsidy for agri-diesel. But there is, as you say, common shared denominators. One of them is the growing frustration with the Green Deal, which is seen to be perhaps too pro-environment at the cost of agricultural production and competitiveness on world markets. And in fact, some of the legislation is already being postponed just to give some air to farmers. And then the second growing denominator, shall we call it, is that of unfair competition with third countries, and farmers are asking for a review of the EU's trade policy to get a better chance with regards to other non-EU countries.
Now, much of the worry on the part of the French government, at least, same in Germany, is that this crisis could push more farmers toward the far right. Now, that's a worry on many levels, particularly as the EU elections are around the corner. How much do you see that really happening, this movement toward the far right on the part of the farmers?
I mean, let's be very clear. This is probably one of the EU campaign's first battleground in France. And the far right, with Jordan Bardella, the lead candidate for the Rassemblement National, has been all over the news trying to create this binary anti-pro-EU narrative where the EU is just not there to support farmers' interests. He calls it Macron's Europe, and this is very much the narrative that is growing. In fact, when you look at voting behaviors, the farmers that used to be more attracted to the more traditional right-wing aisle, ever since the early 2000s up to now, are turning more and more towards the far right. So not only is this a chance for the far right to gain some grounds ahead of the EU elections in June, but it's also something that is being taken very seriously in the government, and they want to integrate this narrative to not make it and to avoid the anti-pro-EU conversation and establish themselves as those listening to farmers' concerns, all the while respecting what the EU is doing.
So, Théo, how do things move forward? Is there any chance that the EU could roll back or France could roll back on some of these policies?
I mean, it's very hard to say. There are announcements that are expected as of tomorrow morning, so we'll get a better sense then. Ultimately, what's clear is that there ought to be some kind of work on the simplifications of norms and regulations, which is at the heart of the farmers' demands. And then, as I said earlier, there was a number of files that were supposed to be presented at the European Parliament under the Green Deal that have basically been frozen, one on protection over toxic substances, another one on animal welfare. That's been shelved because there's a risk that this is seen as yet more burden on farmers, and the European Commission is very clear, or is sending the signals that this is the last thing that they want to do.
All right, Theo, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with
Thank you
us.
very much.
Théo Bourgery-Gonse from Euractiv. Thank you.